My name is Alexander Reed. 20 years ago, I was 24, reckless with dreams, and foolish enough to believe that love could survive anything. The summer of 2005 smelled of salt air and wild jasmine. I had just finished my architecture degree and returned to the small coastal town of Willow Bay to work on my father's old boathouse project. That's where I first saw her, Elara Voss. She was 21, barefoot on the dock with paint-stained overalls, her long dark hair tied back with a piece of blue ribbon. She was restoring an old sailboat that everyone said was beyond repair. I watched her for 3 days before I finally gathered the courage to speak. "You know that boat's been sitting there since before we were born, right?" I called out. She didn't even look up. "Everything broken can be fixed, if someone cares enough to try." That was the first thing she ever said to me. And somehow, those words wrapped themselves around my chest and never really left. Over the next few weeks, we fell into each other like people who had been waiting their whole lives to be found. We spent nights on that half-restored boat, talking about dreams, fears, and futures we were too young to fully understand. She wanted to travel the world restoring old ships. I wanted to build homes that actually felt like homes. One night, under a sky so full of stars it felt fake, we made a promise. We were sitting on the edge of the dock, legs dangling over the dark water. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "If we ever get lost, if life pulls us apart, promise me you'll come back for me, no matter how many years it takes." I turned to her, heart pounding. "Only if you promise the same." She looked straight into my eyes, those deep hazel eyes that always saw too much, and said, softly, "I promise. I will wait for you, Alex, even if it takes 20 years. Even if the whole world tells me to move on." I smiled like an idiot and kissed her forehead. "Then I promise too. I'll find my way back to you, always." We sealed it with a kiss that tasted like salt, hope, and young love. The kind of promise only 20-somethings can make, full of fire and naivety. But life, as it turns out, doesn't care about promises made on moonlit docks. 3 months later, my father had a massive heart attack. I was forced to move to New York to handle the family business, a business I never wanted. Elara's mother got sick at the same time. She had to stay in Willow Bay. We tried. God, we tried so hard. Late-night calls, handwritten letters, plans to meet halfway. But distance has a cruel way of turning love into memories. Slowly, painfully, the calls became shorter. The letters stopped, and one day, we just faded. I told myself it was for the best. She deserved someone who could actually be there. I buried myself in work, in buildings, in a life that looked successful from the outside. But every night for 20 years, when the world went quiet, I heard her voice saying, "I promise. I will wait for you, Alex." And every night I wondered, did she really wait? The first year after I left Willow Bay was the hardest. I called Elara every single night for the first 3 months. Then it became every other night. Then once a week. Until eventually, the calls started feeling like obligations instead of lifelines. Work consumed me. My father's company was drowning in debt, and I became the only one who could save it. Late meetings turned into all-nighters. All-nighters turned into years. She tried too. In the beginning, I still remember her last letter, the one that broke something inside me. It arrived 2 years after I left. The handwriting was shaky. "Alex, I still go to the dock every evening. The boat is almost finished. She's beautiful now, but she feels empty without you. I'm still keeping my promise, but it's getting harder. Please tell me you haven't forgotten us." I cried that night for the first time in years, but I never wrote back. I convinced myself I was protecting her. What kind of life could I give her while I was fighting to keep my family from losing everything? The years blurred together after that. I built a name for myself in New York. Reed Architecture became one of the most respected firms in the city. I designed glass towers that touched the sky, luxury homes for people who had everything except peace. On paper, I had succeeded, but success tasted like ash. I tried to move on. I dated. I even got engaged once, to a smart, beautiful lawyer named Claire. She was perfect on every level. But 6 months before the wedding, I called it off. When she asked me why, I had no answer that made sense. All I could say was, "She's still there. Somewhere." Claire looked at me with pity and said, "You never really left that town, did you?" I threw myself deeper into work, built more buildings, made more money, became more hollow. Meanwhile, back in Willow Bay, life moved on without me. I heard through old friends that Elara's mother passed away, that she finished restoring the sailboat and actually sailed it alone for a few years. Some people said she left town. Others said she got married. The rumors changed every time I gathered the courage to ask. I stopped asking after a while. 20 years, 2 decades of wondering, of guilt, of quiet regret that never quite left my chest. Every time I saw the ocean, every time I smelled jasmine, every time I saw a blue ribbon, I thought of her. And still, I never went back. Until last month, I received a letter with no return address. The handwriting on the envelope made my heart stop. It was hers. Inside was just one line, written in that same elegant script I remembered so well. If you still remember our promise, come home, before it's too late. I stared at that letter for 3 days. Part of me wanted to tear it up. The other part, the part that had been quietly dying for 20 years, booked a flight the same long night. As the plane descended over the familiar coastline, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The town looked almost exactly as I remembered it. Smaller, quieter, like it had been frozen in time while I had aged. I drove straight to the old dock. The boathouse was still there, and so was the sailboat, beautifully maintained, its hull gleaming under the evening sun. But there was no one around. I stood there, heart hammering, whispering to the wind like a fool, "Elara, I'm here." And then I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, slow, familiar. I turned around. There she was, Elara Voss, 41 years old. Still the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. But there was something different in her eyes now, a depth, a quiet strength, and something else I couldn't quite read. She stopped a few feet away from me. The wind played with her hair, just like it used to. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me with those same hazel eyes and said softly, "You forgot our promise, Alex." Her words hit me like a wave crashing against the dock. "You forgot our promise, Alex." I stood there frozen, 20 years of guilt rushing into my chest all at once. She looked different, yet somehow exactly the same. The years had been kind to her, but they had also sharpened her. There was a quiet strength in her posture now, a calm that came only from surviving storms. "Elara," my voice cracked. "I didn't forget. I thought you had." She gave a small, sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's the problem with promises, isn't it? They're easy to make when you're young, much harder to keep when life starts breaking you." We walked slowly along the dock. The old sailboat, Serenity, rocked gently beside us, her paint fresh, her sails neatly folded. I could see Elara had taken care of her all these years. I wanted to say 1,000 things. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to ask why she called me back after so long. But instead I stayed silent, afraid that if I spoke too much, she might disappear like a dream. She finally broke the quiet. "I kept track of you, you know," she said, staring out at the water. "Your buildings, your success, the fancy awards, the engagement that didn't happen." She glanced at me sideways. "I almost reached out when I heard you called off the wedding, but I stopped myself." "Why?" I asked, my throat tight. "Because some promises aren't meant to be forced. They have to be remembered on their own." The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, the same colors we used to watch together all those years ago. Everything felt painfully familiar. I told her about my life, about the pressure after my father's death, about how I'd buried myself in work so I wouldn't have to feel the emptiness, about the nights I drove to the coast just to sit near the ocean because it reminded me of her. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she simply nodded. "And yet, you never came back. Not once in 20 years. There was no anger in her voice, only a quiet sadness that hurt worse than any accusation could. I stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I was scared," I admitted. "Scared that if I came back and you had moved on, it would destroy me. So I stayed away, like a coward." Elara looked at me for a long moment. The wind tugged at her hair, and for a second, I saw the 21-year-old girl I fell in love with. "You built an impressive life, Alex. Big city, big name. But tell me something." She stepped closer. "Are you happy?" The question landed heavy between us. I opened my mouth, but no easy answer came out. She nodded as if she already knew. "I didn't call you here to punish you," she said softly. "I called you because something happened recently. Something I can't carry alone anymore." My heart rate spiked. "What do you mean?" Elara looked away, toward the horizon. For the first time since I arrived, I saw fear in her eyes. "There are things I never told you. Things I kept because I made a promise, not just to you, but to someone else. And now, time is running out." She turned back to me, her voice barely above a whisper. I kept my promise, Alex. For 20 years. But I'm not sure you're ready for what that actually means. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I reached for her hand, but she gently pulled away. Not tonight, she said. Come to the old house tomorrow evening. There's something I need to show you. She started walking back down the dock, then paused. Oh, and Alex? She called over her shoulder. Yes? This time, her smile was bittersweet. Be careful what you wish for. Some truths, once remembered, can't be forgotten again. I barely slept that night. The old beach house I rented was the same one my family used to own. Every creak of the wooden floor, every crash of the waves outside reminded me of summers long gone. I kept replaying Elara's words in my head. I kept my promise. Something I can't carry alone anymore. What could she possibly mean after 20 years? The next evening, I drove to her house, the small white cottage on the cliff overlooking the bay. It looked exactly as I remembered, except for the rose bushes she had planted along the path. They were in full bloom. She opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing a simple cream sweater and jeans, her hair loose. No makeup. She didn't need any. Time had only made her more beautiful, in that quiet, haunting way. Come in, she said. Her voice was calm, but I could sense the tension underneath. The inside of the house was warm and lived in. Books everywhere. A half-finished ship model on the dining table. And on the mantelpiece, a framed photo of us. Young, laughing, sitting on Serenity with our arms around each other. I stared at it longer than I should have. I couldn't throw it away, she said quietly, noticing my gaze. No matter how much I tried, we sat in the living room. She poured 2 glasses of wine, but barely touched hers. I could tell she was nervous, the same way she used to fidget with her sleeves when something big was coming. Before I show you anything, she began, I need you to understand something. I never stopped loving you, Alex. Even when I hated you for leaving. Even when I tried to forget you. My chest tightened. Then why didn't you reach out sooner? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Because I made another promise. One that wasn't just mine to break. She stood up and motioned for me to follow her. We walked down a narrow hallway to a room at the back. She paused at the door, hand on the knob. What I'm about to show you, it's going to change how you see everything. Are you sure you're ready? I nodded, even though my heart was pounding. She opened the door. The room was painted soft blue. There was a desk, bookshelves, and in the corner, a single bed. But what caught my attention was the wall opposite the window. It was covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. All connected with red string like some kind of investigation board. And in the center of it all was my face. Dozens of photos of me, from different years. Some from architecture magazines, some taken secretly in New York. There were notes written in her handwriting. Alex, completed Central Tower project. He looked tired in this interview. Still not married. I felt the room spin. Elara, what is all this? She stood beside me, voice soft but steady. For 20 years, I kept my promise. While you were building your empire, I was here, watching over something far more important. She walked to the desk and picked up a thick envelope. Her hands were trembling slightly as she handed it to me. Open it. Inside were official documents, medical records, and a photograph. A photograph of a young man, 19 or 20 years old. Dark hair, familiar eyes, my eyes. I looked up at her, stunned. His name is Noah, she whispered. He's your son, Alex. The floor felt like it disappeared beneath me. He's known about you his whole life, she continued, tears now shining in her eyes. But I promised him I would only bring you into his life if you came back on your own, if you remembered us. He's been very sick, Alex. The doctors say he might not have much time left. She stepped closer, her voice breaking for the first time. I kept our promise. I raised him. I protected him. I waited for you. For 20 years. Now the question is. She looked straight into my eyes, tears falling freely now. Are you going to keep yours? The envelope slipped from my hands. I stared at the photograph of the young man, my son, unable to speak. Noah had my jawline, my stubborn eyes, but his mother's gentle smile. 20 years of my life suddenly rearranged themselves in my mind. All the nights I felt empty, all the times I almost came back. All the years I told myself I was doing the right thing by staying away. I had a son, and I had missed his entire life. Say something, Alex, Elara whispered. Her voice was trembling. I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to breathe. Why didn't you tell me? She let out a broken laugh, tears still streaming down her face. Tell you? When? When you were engaged to someone else? When you were building skyscrapers and giving interviews about success? When you never even replied to my last letter? Her pain hit me harder than any anger could have. I was terrified, she continued. I was 22, pregnant, and the man I loved vanished. My mother was dying. I had no one. So I made a choice. I decided I would raise him alone and keep my promise to you, that I would wait. But I also promised Noah that I would only bring his father into his life, when that father chose to return. I walked over to the wall covered with photos and notes. My entire life, documented by the woman I left behind. There were pictures of Noah as a baby, as a child learning to sail, as a teenager standing proudly next to Serenity. He's brilliant, she said softly, coming to stand beside me. He wants to study marine architecture. He's been restoring boats with me since he was 8. He's everything good about both of us. I turned to her, my voice hoarse. Is he really sick? Elara nodded, wiping her tears. Rare autoimmune condition. It's been getting worse for the last 2 years. The doctors in Boston say he needs a very specific treatment, and possibly a bone marrow transplant. I'm not a match. We've been searching for donors, but the chances are slim. She looked up at me with exhausted, hopeful eyes. You might be a match, Alex, but even if you're not, he deserves to meet his father before it's too late. The weight of 20 years crashed down on me all at once. Guilt, shame, anger at myself, and underneath it all, a fierce, sudden love for a son I had never met. I want to see him, I said suddenly. Right now. Elara shook her head. Not tonight. He doesn't know you're here yet. I wanted to speak with you first. He's been through enough disappointment. If you come into his life now, you cannot leave again. I won't let you break his heart too. Her words stung, but I deserved them. We moved to the living room and sat in silence for a long time. The old clock on the wall ticked away, the same one that used to mark our stolen nights together. Finally, I spoke. I know I don't have the right to ask you this, but do you still love me, Elara? She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I never stopped loving you, she said quietly. But love isn't enough anymore. Not after 20 years. Not when our son's life is hanging in the balance. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. Tomorrow morning, I'll take you to meet Noah. But I need you to understand something, Alex. She turned back to me, her voice steady, but filled with warning. If you walk into his life, you have to stay. No matter how hard it gets. No matter what you discover about the past. Because if you leave again, her voice cracked. This time, I won't be the only one waiting for you. The next morning arrived too quickly. I barely slept, haunted by the photograph of Noah and the weight of everything I had missed. When Elara's car pulled up outside my rental house at 9 a.m., my hands were still shaking. We drove in silence toward the hospital in Portland, 40 minutes away. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Halfway there, Elara finally spoke. He doesn't know you're coming. I told him I had a surprise, but I didn't say what. He's fragile right now. Please don't make this harder for him than it already is. I nodded, staring out the window. I won't. When we reached the hospital, my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Elara led me through the corridors until we reached a private room on the 3rd floor. She paused outside the door and looked at me one last time. Whatever happens in there, remember your promise. Then she opened the door. Noah was sitting up in bed reading a book about shipbuilding. He looked thinner than in the photos, with dark circles under his eyes. But when he saw his mother, his face lit up with a smile that felt painfully familiar. Mom, you're early today. His words died when he saw me standing behind her. The room went completely silent. Noah's eyes, my eyes, widened in recognition. He looked from me to his mother and back again. Dad! Dad! The word came out as a whisper, uncertain, like he was afraid it might break. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Elara stepped forward gently. Noah, this is Alexander Reed, your father. The young man stared at me for what felt like forever. Then, to my shock, he smiled. A small, tired but genuine smile. I knew you'd come, he said quietly. Mom always said you would, even when everyone else told her she was crazy. I walked closer, my legs feeling weak. I'm so sorry, Noah. I didn't know. If I had known. It's okay, he interrupted softly. Mom explained everything. She said you made a promise when you were young, and that promises like that, they take time sometimes. His maturity at 19 broke me more than anything else could have. We talked for nearly 2 hours. He told me about growing up in Willow Bay, about sailing with his mother, about how he always felt something was missing. He asked me about my buildings, about New York, about why I never came back. Every question felt like a knife. Later, when Noah grew tired and the nurses came to run some tests, Elara and I stepped outside into the hallway. She leaned against the wall, looking exhausted but relieved. "He likes you," she said. "More than I expected." I turned to her, the guilt eating me alive. "Elara, I broke our promise. I know that, but I'm here now. I want to make this right. For him. For you." She looked at me with those deep hazel eyes that had haunted me for 2 decades. Then she said the words I had been dreading since I arrived. "You forgot our promise, Alex." But I never did. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, yet it cut deeper than any shout could. I kept it every single day for 20 years. While I was pregnant and scared. While I was raising our son, alone. While I sat in hospital rooms wondering if he would live to see his next birthday, I kept it even when I hated you. She stepped closer, tears glistening in her eyes. "But now, I need to know. Are you finally going to keep yours? Or are you going to go back to your perfect life in New York once the guilt fades?" The question hung heavy in the sterile hospital corridor. Before I could answer, a doctor stepped out of Noah's room, his face serious. "Ms. Voss, we need to talk. His condition has worsened overnight. We may need to move faster than expected." Elara's face went pale. She looked back at me, fear and exhaustion written all over her features. "This is your moment, Alex. Don't make me regret waiting for you." The doctor's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elara's face went pale. She gripped my arm tightly without realizing it. For the first time since I had arrived, I saw raw fear in her eyes. We followed the doctor into a private consultation room. The news was not good. Noah's condition had deteriorated faster than expected. His immune system was attacking his own organs. The treatment they had hoped for was no longer enough. He needed a bone marrow transplant, and soon. I didn't hesitate. "Test me," I said immediately. "Right now. I want to be tested." Elara looked at me surprised. The doctor nodded and arranged for the blood work. While we waited for the results, Elara and I sat in the hospital garden. The silence between us was heavy. After a long time she spoke. "There's something else you need to know, Alex. Something I never told anyone." I waited, my heart pounding. She took a deep breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was going to tell you. I even bought a plane ticket to New York. But the day before I was supposed to leave, I received a call from your assistant." She looked down at her hands. "She told me you were engaged, that you were happy, that you had finally moved on and it would be cruel to ruin your life with old complications." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. "I never said that," I started. "I know," she whispered, "but at the time, I believed it. I was young, scared, and alone. So I tore up the ticket. I decided I would raise Noah by myself, and I made a new promise, to never reach out unless you came back on your own." Tears were falling freely down her face now. "I kept every letter you never wrote, every photo, every article. I told Noah stories about you, the good ones. I wanted him to be proud of his father, even if his father didn't know he existed." My chest felt like it was being crushed. "All these years," I said, voice breaking, "you carried this alone?" She nodded. "I kept our promise, Alex. Even when it hurt. Even when I watched you succeed from afar. Even when Noah asked about you on his birthdays." She reached out and took my hand for the first time since I had returned. "But I'm tired, Alex. I'm so tired of being strong. If you're going to stay, then stay. Really stay. Not just until the guilt passes. Not just until Noah gets better. I need you to choose us this time." Before I could respond, the doctor returned with the test results. I was a partial match. Not perfect, but good enough that the transplant had a real chance of success. The relief on Elara's face was something I will never forget. That evening, I finally sat alone with Noah. He was weak but alert. We talked for hours, about sailing, about dreams, about all the years we had lost. He didn't blame me. He said his mother had prepared him his whole life for this moment. Before I left his room, he grabbed my hand weakly. "Dad, promise me something." "Anything," I said. He smiled faintly. "Promise you won't disappear again. Mom waited 20 years for you. She deserves to be happy too." I hugged my son for the first time in his life, tears burning in my eyes. Later that night, Elara and I stood on the hospital balcony, overlooking the city lights. She looked exhausted but more at peace than I had seen her since my return. "I kept my promise, Alex," she said softly, echoing the words from the dock. I turned to her, took both her hands in mine, and spoke with every ounce of truth I had left in me. I know I forgot ours for a long time, but I'm here now, and I'm never breaking it again. She searched my eyes for a long moment, as if deciding whether to believe me. Then, for the first time in 20 years, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against mine. The world felt still, but deep down, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. 6 months later, the wind carried the familiar scent of salt and jasmine as I stood on the newly repaired dock. Serenity, the old sailboat Elara had restored with her own hands, gleamed under the morning clay sun, her sails ready for a journey. Today, she would finally sail again. Noah stood beside me, thinner than before but alive. The transplant had been successful. The doctors called it a miracle. He still got tired easily, but every day he grew stronger. My son, the boy I never knew I needed until he looked at me with those familiar eyes and called me Dad. You ready for this? I asked him. He grinned, the same crooked smile his mother had. I've been ready for 20 years. Elara walked toward us from the house, carrying a small basket. She looked radiant in a light blue dress, her hair blowing freely in the sea breeze. The years had left their marks, but to me, she had never looked more beautiful. She stopped in front of me and smiled softly. You came back, she whispered. I'm never leaving again. We boarded Serenity together, the three of us. As we cast off from the dock, the boat moved gracefully through the water, just like we had dreamed about when we were young and foolish. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Noah went below deck to rest. Elara and I stood at the stern, watching the lights of Willow Bay fade into the distance. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, exactly like she used to. You kept your promise, I said quietly. She shook her head gently. No, Alex. I kept ours. For 20 years, through every lonely night, every hospital visit, every time Noah asked why his father wasn't there, I kept it even when I thought you never would. I turned to face her fully, cupping her face in my hands. I'm sorry it took me so long, but I'm here now, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for every single day I missed. Tears glistened in her eyes as she smiled. You forgot our promise, she said softly, repeating the words that had brought me back. But I never did, and now, here we are. I leaned down and kissed her, slow, deep, and full of 20 years of longing, regret, and rediscovered love. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. Welcome home, Alex. As Serenity sailed under the stars, I held the two people I loved most in this world. The boy I never knew I had, the woman who waited 2 decades for a promise I almost broke, and for the first time in 20 years, I was exactly where I was meant to be.